Joining me now is Kytja Weir. She is the state politics editor for Center for Public Integrity. Kytja, welcome to Rebel Headquarters.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Kytja, I wanted to ask you first, for people who don't know, what's the Center for Public Integrity?
Sure. We are a nonprofit newsroom, and we do investigative reporting on all kinds of issues, and then we publish it on our website and also partner with other news organizations such as the Washington Post, NPR, USA Today, and publish those stories around the country.
Okay, and in your role as state politics editor, what do you guys mainly cover?
Well, we're mainly looking at who's trying to influence state politics and state policies, whether that's from the elections, which we obviously just had a ton of stuff going on, to lobbying, to kind of the inner workings of bureaucracy of who's controlling Medicaid decisions, insurance rates, that kind of stuff. So we're looking at all kinds of aspects of state policy and how it affects the actual people in those states.
So I'm super curious about that. Do you think, now let me start broad and then I'll get more specific. Do you think the federal government is more corrupted by outside money and the influence of money, or the state governments?
That's a tough one. Clearly, there's a lot of focus on the federal government, and that's where most of the attention is paid. But a lot of stuff happens on the state level, and it's very hard for people to know what's happening on the state level because so many news outlets have been gutted, especially with their state house reporting. So a lot of people don't know what's happening in their states, and certainly it's really hard to get a sense of what's happening from a national perspective. But what we've seen is that a ton of special influence and money is getting poured into the states, whether it's the elections where more than $2 billion were spent just this election cycle, to the lobbying front where if you look at all the state legislatures around the country, they are passing far more bills every year than Congress even looks at. And so a lot of special interests have gone to the states, and they go state by state by state to try to get their measures passed.
And I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but even a rough sense of it would be interesting to the audience. How much is spent on a national race, whether for Congress or Senate, as opposed to a local state Senate or assembly race?
Oh, well, it's an order of magnitude. So, I mean, obviously you've got a lot of extremes, but so the Texas Senate race was a huge amount of money, close to $100 million, I believe, between both candidates. The state races can be quite small, it can be for like a state legislator can be, a couple $1,000s. So it's a huge difference, but there are obviously some races that get a lot of attention and a lot of money poured into them. And one thing we looked at that was interesting this year is we looked at some of the state leadership positions, people who weren't running for office. Mike Madigan, who's the Speaker of the House in Illinois, he had no one running against him, but he was getting tons of money. So there, is a lot of money that's going into the state races, even in places where they don't have someone they're running against.
So let's talk about the people giving money at the state level. Who are they? And so obviously that's also broad, but I imagine that there are specific categories that give more regularly than others.
Sure. It kind of depends a little bit on which party you're looking at because there are some different dynamics. But in general, there are the business interests in that state tend to give pretty heavily. There also are national interests. So AT&T gives a huge amount of money to state candidates. They give small amounts, but they give, to basically people they think are going to win. Comcast also gives a lot. And then there are, other out-of-state corporations that if they have a local office or if they're an oil company and they have a drilling operation in that state, they often will give heavily. And then you've got constituents give money, to their person who they like, who is going to represent them. But this year we saw something really interesting in that we saw a lot of money coming in from out of state. People who lived in blue states were giving to places that were traditionally red states. People in red states were giving to blue states. So we had a lot of people who were giving outside of their state lines. And that's one of the things we focused on a lot this election cycle.
Who's getting more small dollar donations and who's getting more large dollar donations between the two parties?
So Republicans are still totally winning the money race. That has been true for a while. But Democrats had quite a machine this year in terms of the smaller dollar donations. Act Blue was an absolute phenomenon in terms of getting small dollar donations from around the country to state races, congressional races, you name it. And it was really impressive. And I think the Republicans looked at it and were like, wow, we need to copy this.
But they won't be able to. They won't be able to because they're the party of corruption. And there's a reason why they get big dollar donations from oil companies and real estate companies, et cetera, because they barely have any real supporters who would bother to give them money. They can do Act Red all day long. It's never going to work. They've tried it before. It won't work. Anyway, that's my thought on it.
Well, they do have quite a machine of extensive fundraising on the Republican level, and it's there are a lot of corporate interests, but there are also a lot of believers and who are contributing. Some of them are multimillionaires and some of them are regular people. But in general, the amount of money that's pouring into state races and federal races is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah. So for the Republicans, I guess their grassroots are just millionaires. The billionaires and the corporations are the real deal. But we've got grassroots millionaires. So look, I'm saying that also. I don't hide my perspective. I'm a progressive. But I also don't hide my perspective that I can't stand money in politics and I'd take it all out, Democratic and Republican. But in terms of the facts, I mean, you're saying it here. The large donations come from the Republicans. Small dollar donations are coming a lot more from Democrats. And so which side is winning then? Because it's not a clear-cut situation. I'm sure there are a lot of elections where the big money came in and won, and some where the small dollar donations made a bigger difference. So when you look at the overall map, what's your sense of where the trends are going? Which side's winning in that sense?
I mean, I think the small dollar donations, clearly Act Blue really was a real help in Democrats winning a lot of the seats that they did take back. And so I think you could chalk that up as a victory. Is that something that will continue to repeat? It's hard to know. But I do want to point out there is an interesting wrinkle to all of this, ballot measures. We had about 25 billionaires who put in a ton of money to ballot measures this year. They represented about 10% of all of the money spent on ballot measures. A lot of those were actually progressive issues. So on the one hand, you've got, all this money coming in on the Republican side with, some of the corporate interests and some of the environmental ballot measures had a lot of oil and gas money, for example. But then you also have Tom Steyer throwing in a ton of money. You have Mark Zuckerberg putting in a bunch of money, a whole number of people who were giving to generally more progressive causes, and they were spending really big to on issue-related topics at the state level.
No, when the Democrats spend it, it's a good thing. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, for all the Republicans who cry about George Soros money, great, I have a wonderful proposal for them. End private financing of elections. Then you won't have any Soros money or Steyer money or Zuckerberg money going into any ballot measures. But they won't do that because, as you pointed out earlier, they get more of the big dollar donations. So the Republican Party enjoys that corruption. So again, that's just my point of view. Kytja, I want to go back to that question of who's winning and where the trends are going. Is the small dollar donations that Democrats are now getting a big enough number that it could actually rival corporate PAC money and be a real source of revenue if the Democratic Party went completely uncorrupted?
I don't know. I think it probably is still a ways to go before you get up to those reaches of millions and millions of dollars. But I will say that we did find that money doesn't always win, right? We think of money as the panacea, that you get more campaign signs, you get more airtime on TV ads. But we've looked at a number of races where the candidate who didn't have as much money didn't win. So Scott Walker, for example, the governor of Wisconsin, he had like 3-to-1 compared to his opponent, and he lost pretty, I guess unsurprisingly if you were in Wisconsin. But for him, he raised so much money and it didn't matter at the end of the day. So, the small dollar donations, I think Democrats are clearly have found some real energy and got a lot of support from places all over the country for a lot of races. But really, it comes down to who turns out to vote. And this midterm election, we had record turnout for a midterm. The last time we had that kind of turnout was 1914.
Yeah, it is stunning. And it did make a difference, not in every race, as we famously saw, but in a lot of races, certainly at the local level as well. Kytja Weir from Center for Public Integrity, looking forward to talking to you again, because there's so many wonderful and interesting and important state issues that we need to keep track of, and that's what you're doing at Center for Public Integrity. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Like what you see? I hope so. Thank you. So click the subscribe button below, and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from Rebel HQ.